What are we going to talk about?
What is this thing? What the hell is this monstrosity that's in front of us?
Looks like a mess, doesn't it?
It does look like it needs a little bit of work.
The Marantz 6300 turntable. Tell me about it a little bit here.
Well,
why would you be so excited about such a thing?
Oh man, because I like buying broken pieces of equipment and then showing them to my wife. That's what I really enjoy. No, what I like doing is we like finding this stuff and kind of bringing it back. And there's no more of a worthy turntable to bring back from the brink of destruction than the Marantz 6300. An elegant, beautiful turntable with an amazing design. It was the top of the line Marantz turntable. It is what people are looking for. And while maybe 4 or 5 years ago, based on some of the forums that I've read, because I'm not old in this shit, but based on that, these were going for about $500 about 5 years ago, and now they're worth getting close to triple that, Lance.
Yep.
Triple.
Yep. I mean, I've seen them go for between $800 and $1,200, maybe even $15 for something pristine. So yeah, this thing has some potential. So let's pop this open and kind of take a look. You can see this lid is pretty rough.
Yeah, we're missing some hinges, and that's been we've been trying to find a couple parts. I've personally been trying to find a couple parts for it. Lance has been looking around for me. It's missing some hinges. We were able to source a proper tone arm.
Rest, yeah,
rest, but it's missing the clasp. But see, what happens with these units is they start to lose things, right, over time.
Yeah.
And then it's like it becomes this challenge, because when you get to the higher end units, nobody wants to let the pieces go, right? Nobody wants to let the hinges go because they might need them later or something like that.
Yeah, and they just get expensive because people part these things out. Once they're trash, they part them out and sell them for top dollar. So some of the upside is we have both head shells. So this table originally came with 2 head shells, and it says Marantz on there. These things go for a pretty penny, but they're very nice. The other nice piece that it came with is the 45 adapter that says Marantz on it. So you know that would fetch a couple dollars on eBay, wouldn't it?
On the bay.
Yeah.
We're gonna play
this was a unit that was originally owned by a man in Loveland. He had attempted to sell it one other time on Craigslist and got a bunch of punters. I think people will come and see a unit like this and be like, oh dear Jesus, like they just don't know where to start. So luckily for me, I met this guy named Lance. And I'll be honest with you, as far as like I'm learning, as we all are in this video series, we're all learning. But when I get to something heavy duty like this and I'm able to find something like this, first of all, you gotta find the damn thing. And then it's a matter of like, okay, what do I do with it? And that's where someone with the technical know-how like Lance comes in. Because he's actually done one of these. Why don't you tell me about the other one?
Yeah, so I purchased one, a Marantz 6300 this past summer, and it was in pretty rough shape. I would honestly say it was in worse shape than this one. Had some major cosmetic issues, and it just did not, the mechanics didn't work well. But I did the restoration on it, and it came out pretty well. I'm pretty happy with how it came out, and it's my main turntable on my vintage system upstairs. So I think we can do something similar here and bring this thing back to life, and hopefully it'll look good.
I'm pretty excited, man. I'm telling you what. So what we're gonna do is Lance is gonna get busy. The main job on this one, based on my discussion with Lance prior to turning on the cameras, is that we're gonna do a big de-oxed cleanup on the controls here, and then we're gonna do a cap job. Now, the electrolytics on this thing are not super complex.
No, there's only a handful of them, and I purchased the capacitors that we need here. And there's
now,
a small...
Is there a brand that you go with, or is that just...
No, I mean, you want to find kind of auto grade. These are Jackson brand. I just bought these at my local electronics shop. I gave them a list of what I needed, and they went and found it for me. So yeah, none of the audio signal goes through the capacitors here. The capacitors really just control the spinning mechanic and some of the automated systems here. So they don't have to be super audio grade, super high grade, because none of the audio goes through the capacitors.
Good enough, good enough. All right, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go run some cameras, get some tight shots for you guys, and Lance is gonna dive in here, and then we're gonna meet back at the end. Stay tuned.
All right, so we are going to be replacing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 capacitors on this board. One of the things we need to be very careful about is the polarity of the capacitors. They each have a positive and a negative end, and we need to make sure we put those in the right places on this board, or else we're going to have some serious problems, i.e. destroying the board. There's a couple ways to tell. The long end here is the positive end. The end with this line, with these arrows, is the negative end. So we'll be able to tell pretty easily here. One good practice to use is to mark the old capacitors, so that way we know what direction they were originally in. So if we take it out, we don't get confused. So what I'll do is I'll put a tick mark with a Sharpie facing myself on each one of the old capacitors. Morning, so that way, if I get confused, I can go back in and say, okay, this capacitor should be facing this way. That's the positive and negative. Also, there should be a little plus sign on the board indicating which hole is the positive hole. So they try to make it somewhat easy for you, but this is one of those things you have to get right. So we're going to start by removing these. There's two large 470 microfarad 50 volt capacitors, and I have the replacements right here. You can see the modern capacitors are quite a bit smaller than the ones from the 70s. So this board's going to look a little bit different than it does now when it's done. So we need to remove the old capacitors, so we have to determine where they are connected underneath the board. We need to melt the solder, and then we will use our solder sucker to remove that. Lots of times in these boards, we don't have a lot of room to work because they are wired up, and we don't want to have to unsolder all these wires. So we just have to do the best we can. So some of these big capacitors are actually glued to the board, so sometimes you have to give them a little push to get them out of there. So we're gonna kind of loosen up some of the solder around these edges.
All right, let's go.
So when you're removing solder, you can use this tool. It has a plunger, and when you lift up, it makes a suction, and it will pull up the wet solder in there, and then you would push it down, reset it. Glue breaking. There we go. So this is a 470 microfarad 50 volt.
Oh yeah, morning guys.
470 microfarad 50 volt. So one thing is you can go, when you're replacing capacitors, you can go up on voltage, but you have to keep the same capacitance. So the microfarads have to be the same, but the voltage can be higher. You don't want to go lower. So we're going to put the long end where the plus sign is. Solder around these joints. Please make sure you do this in a well-ventilated area. Some of these fumes are lead-based. If you breathe enough of them, they're not going to hurt you, but they could give you a little bit of a headache. Those solder joints look nice.
Let's go, let's go.
We'll cut the ends off.
Share this stream for a chance to win some Good Vibes coffee. Our man Christian, he just sent out a couple to our friends Abby,
yeah, our first capacitor,
to my mother-in-law Jan, who were the stream winners the last couple weeks. So if you want to win some coffee from delicious Good Vibes coffee roasters, share the stream for me. We got a lot of music to go. And hopefully we can get our buddy Mr. Casey Russell in the stream. He was having a little power outage at his home, but we're gonna see if we can get him on in a bit.
I replace one cap at a time, so I'm making sure I'm putting the correct capacitor in the correct spot, because we don't want to get them mixed up and put the wrong value in the wrong spot. This glue can be a real pain. So this is another 470 50 volt. And it is facing a different direction, but we make sure we put the long end where the plus sign is. Yeah, so we want to cut the leads off because the board won't stay flat and you don't want it to short anywhere. So you just take your wire cutters and clip them about as close as you can. Make sure they don't go flying. So we replaced 2 of the capacitors. We got 4 to go. We'll pick this up on the last cap. So we're putting in our last capacitor. This is the little one. This is a 0.47 microfarad. We already pulled out the old one. I'm gonna solder this baby right in here. Awkward position.
This one's a little tough because...
This one's a little tough because it's a really tight spot. We're getting it in. All right, looks good. Let's put a little solder on there. Yeah, it looks like it's nice and straight. Try not to burn myself. That's always important. Now the nice thing is this solder that I have has the solder flux built right into it. Its core is made of the flux, so then it'll flow pretty easily once it gets warm enough. Let's take a look here. Let's clean up this joint a little bit. Don't want to touch the wires with the hot soldering iron. So these circuit boards have little solder pads on them that help the solder connect to the trace. Sometimes those little pads pop right off if you put a little too much pressure on them, and then the solder doesn't flow, and then you're not going to get a good good connection. So I just wanted to take a quick look here. Looks like it's okay. So what you have to do if you lose the pad, you have to run an actual wire from that lead to the connecting leads. So you basically have to make your own trace. So it's kind of a pain, so you don't want to have to do that, but it is fixable. It just looks a little bit ugly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to check the continuity, make sure that there is an electrical signal can pass through our lead that we soldered and the next lead over. And if it does, we're going to be okay. So I'm going to set my multimeter to the diode setting. So if it should beep if we have continuity. I'm going to touch the lead that we have here, then try to find a corresponding lead, and yep, it does have continuity, so we're good. So it's good to check those things. If we put this all back together and it wasn't right, something would be acting weird, and then we'd have to pull it all apart again and check that.
Oh yeah, good morning, y'all.
So it's good to check these things if something looks weird. All right, so we're done with our capacitors. I'm gonna clip these leads here. We're gonna put this board back together, and our next step is to clean the switches and the potentiometers and see if we can get this going. We're gonna apply some of this de-oxed D5 in these potentiometers right here, or pots. So these, on the other side of this, are the knobs that control the speed. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna spray a little of this, and what this is going to do is going to remove some of the oxidation that might have built up in here, which would cause these connections not to be solid. So we'll shake this up. There's a couple spots you can spray in this little place here, and then there's always this little hole right on the top, and that ought to do it. So we're going to turn this back and forth 20 times. Already feel that it's moving a lot more smoothly than it did before. All right, let's get the other one real good. Yeah, it's turning kind of tight now. I can feel it loosening up. What this will do, this is probably the best thing you could do to help the turntable maintain a steady speed. That's moving really smooth now. Clean. Next thing we're going to do is, as you can see, there's about 20 of these little black switches right here. And this is what controls a lot of the functionality of this turntable. So what we're gonna have to do is pop these out.
Cheers, everybody.
And
Thanks
give
for
them a
hanging
little
out.
spray of this de-oxed and hit that little switch a bunch of times just to make sure these switches are nice and clean. So I'm going to do a couple of these for you. Unfortunately, we'll have to unscrew the bracket to get at the bottom because the button is usually on the bottom here. There is one switch under this metal plate, so we're going to have to remove this plate to get at that one. I'm going to use this yellow tool to get that screw out of there so it doesn't fall in. We'll be able to get it out. So here we go. There's the switch. And there's a little hole right next to the switch, and that's where we want to spray our de-oxed. And then what we're going to do is we're going to spray a little bit in there. And then we're going to hit that switch about 20 times. All right, and then we can put it back in. So there's some little nubs and some holes here, so that way you can make sure these switches are aligned correctly. So just line them up to those and it should be good. That one is the power switch, it looks like. Oh, that's the power switch. All right. So we'll do one more here. This. Get a little spray. That should do it. And what we're going to do is we're going to do that same thing for all of the rest of the switches, about 10 switches total here. And then, yeah, we'll be back when we get done with that. All right, so we got our switches all cleaned and de-oxed and put back in. So one of the things you have to check is when you mounted these switches back that they still make contact correctly. So the way this system works is there is a bar that goes through the length of the system, and it will press a number of these switches depending on what function it wants to do. So it's good to move this bar back and forth to make sure it is hitting all the switches and they're getting pressed correctly. The other thing regarding this bar is there is some grease and lubrication in some certain spots. This grease has gotten kind of old and dry, and it would be good to replace that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Q-tip and some of our isopropyl alcohol and remove some of that old grease. Sometimes it's hard to really get all of it without taking apart the whole system, but we don't want to have to do that. But if we can just get what we can see, that'll go a long way in the movement of these components. So this alcohol and this Q-tip gets that stuff right off there, and we have a nice clean surface to apply some new grease. All right, so the grease I like to use is this white lithium grease. It will last for a real long time. So I'll take a clean end of a Q-tip. I'll put a dab in the area that we want to lubricate. And then I'll start moving it around and kind of spreading it around with the Q-tip. If you put a little too much, it's not the end of the world, but good to get all the areas where metal parts are rubbing against other metal parts. And move it back and forth so it spreads the grease around, and then we'll be good. That's moving nice and smooth now, so I think we're all lubed up. So we've replaced our capacitors on this board. We've used de-oxed on all the switches and the potentiometers, and we've lubed a lot of the moving components in here. I think it's time that we button this baby back up and see how it works. We got much of the guts redone, and we're gonna see if this thing works. So I'm gonna put the ladder back on. First, we're gonna test to make sure that it spins at the right speed. So I have it plugged in, and I have it set for 33 RPM. So we'll check our strobe here. So now we're looking at the strobe. We want to see if we can get this to spin at a constant rate. So I'm going to turn the 33 pitch knob until that little red dot is not floating anymore. That looks like that's about it. Now I'm going to switch to the 45 RPM. And I'm going to turn the 45 knob to where it's nice and steady. Oh, there we go. Not too much. Let's bring it back. That looks pretty good. All right, the next we want to replace this tone arm post. Found this one online. This one's got the edge broken off. To remove this, there are two tiny little screws that we can loosen that hold this in. So I'll loosen these set screws, and we should be able to pull this thing right out. There it is. We need to make sure we get it at the right height. So that way, in the right angle, so that way it just sets right there where the tone arm wants to rest. It looks pretty close. We can adjust it later if we need to once we get it moving. I will tighten up these set screws. So we've done pretty much all of the mechanical restoration on this thing. Let's test this out and see if we can get it to actually play a record. I'll put the mat back on here. I'm gonna put this cartridge on. I've already preset the weight, so that's correct. My assistant would hand me a nice record to try. Get it spinning. I'm going to press the up, so that's going up, so that's good. So we want to make sure that the tone arm will go all the way down to the record. Press down. There it is.
Ooh.
Let's go up. Make sure it goes up and down again. Now we'll go up. I want to make sure the
How we feeling out there, friends?
automatic function works correctly. So let's press the down button. It should spin back up here.
All right, all right. How we doing out there,
I'm
guys?
going to bring it back up. I'm going to
Sunday.
move it to the lead out.
Getting a little scratchy.
It's hard to tell if it's right
headphones
there.
here. Hopefully it sounds okay.
And then it
Yeah,
should
Hope you guys are doing good.
stop
Cheers.
and go up. Works like a charm. Well, that about does it for the mechanical restoration of this Marantz 6300. The next step will be to do a cosmetic restoration on it, and we'll leave that to a future video. Thanks.